Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. This show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness initiative. This episode is sponsored by Police Mortgage. Police Mortgage is a full-service mortgage company dedicated to serving police officers and first responders. Founded in 2008, Police Mortgage offers a variety of mortgage products tailored to meet the needs of those who serve and protect. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. Now for part 2 of LA Not So Confidential.
It's such a unique time in history if we're just looking at these handful of years.
So you say that I'm asking you a tough question, but you give me a very high level doctorate type answer. And basically what I got from both of you is now I'm ticked off because my dad seems like he's right.
Oh man, sorry. I didn't know that going into it.
He and I have these discussions for reference. I'm in my mid-50s, he's in his mid-70s. And so I'll come out and say, it seems like this is worse, that's happening. Almost verbatim as you said in your answer, which was, we have this referendum and look what's happening now. And I'll make comments like that. And my dad will say something like Dr. Scott just said, which is, crime was tough in the 70s. Crime was tough in the 60s. You just didn't see it on Facebook and Fox News 24/7 and so forth. So basically, you're telling me that my father is right.
Well, yes, of course. It sounds like we adore your father. But I will say, it might just be a perspective because of what we're consuming, but perspective matters, right? So excuse me, again. Today I was at a roll call.
It's a taco. It's that,
I know.
You got a little cilantro going on there.
You're going to cut that out, right? Ken?
I may or may not. So that's actually kind of funny. Dr. Scott, should I cut that out or should I leave that in?
Man.
Leave it in.
There we go. See? Okay.
Hopefully
everybody wants to leave it in, raise their hand.
The
there we
fleck
go.
of tortilla that hit the camera as she coughed.
Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine what your audience thinks right now.
Ulcer of blood. What's going on over there? Anyhow, go ahead.
So I was at a roll call today with some officers getting ready to go out on patrol, and we were talking about, I just kind of made it an open forum. I didn't go in with an agenda, and we've had some tragedies in the department lately. Mm-hmm. And I said, what do you guys think is going on with people? We're having a lot of issues that are coming to the surface and coming to the attention of command staff as far as like alcohol issues. Mm-hmm. But then we've also had, some tragedies happen, and they were talking. It was actually really lovely because they started off saying, look, we go to a party or go to socialize and everyone wants to talk about our profession, right? And their 2 cents. So we got to hear it when we're out of work. And then we come to work and we're not getting waves and like people thanking us for their service, like they used to. It's tough. But when I sit back, and this is them saying it, when we sit back and think about it, we're incredibly grateful for the job that we have. It might be tough, but there's still so much good, and there's so much to be grateful for. We make a great salary. We have wonderful benefits. We don't pay enough attention. You can get lost in the misery and the negative. We don't pay attention to the good enough. And they started kind of bouncing off each other and talking about these things. And we talked about the way in which a career kind of has its trajectory. It's very much like a marriage, like a relationship. You have the honeymoon phase, you have the settling in phase, and a lot of people are in that disillusionment phase right now. Yeah. And it's a choice. At the end of the day, it's a choice of, am I going to let all of the horrible stuff I saw today dictate how I'm going to live my life or how I'm going to interact with my family? Or if I want to think about the things that I'm grateful for, and the fact that I'm here and able-bodied and able to do this job. And we do see if someone stays in their career, the happiness level swings back up towards the end, just like in a marriage. There's kind of this U shape that goes to it. And I came away incredibly inspired, because I thought it could have gone just totally negative
Sure.
Nancy the whole time. And they reminded me that they're taking care of each other, that they're in a good headspace, and they have grit, and they're going to get through it, and they're going to probably outlast the city leaders and the command that they think doesn't support them. They're still going to be there after that. There's going to be change.
Yeah.
So
I also, part of the responsibilities of my day job include mental health intervention training. And I provide a 2.5 to 3 hour lecture to about 40 officers every 2 weeks. And, one of the things we talk about is the level of stress. I mean, first responders inhabit the top 3 layers of the most stressful jobs within the US. And one of the things that makes law enforcement, especially in a large metropolitan area like ours, is that the job continues to evolve. It's not a static bullet point list of expectations. Every single year, there's a new paradigm. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's actually, we need to expand our paradigm. We need to constantly resolve it. We need to renovate it. We need to rewrite it. But I think in my opinion, my clinical opinion, I think it moves way too fast for our officers right now. And, we send a mixed message to our officers too. We're like, well, you're not a social worker, but we want you to act as a social worker out in the field. You're not this, but you have this responsibility that is everything that particular thing is. And that is really stressful. Like if you were to send conflicting and mixed messages to a child, that'd be verging on child abuse, right? So we have this kind of, and unfortunately the public doesn't understand that. And I'm not being an apologist for anything that law enforcement has done incorrectly, badly, or criminally. I'm not apologizing, but I'm just saying that I wish people would come and take like a mental health intervention training, or I wish that there were more opportunities for people to go along and see what day-to-day life is like for police, rather than an episode of Cops.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you hit it right on the money, and both of you gave me a perfect segue to my next question. You guys should do a podcast. You're really good at this. But I know that I am usual in that, I go and work with so many people in the law enforcement profession. I do kind of get the whole you stress, and you're asked to do this, but you can't do that. You got to go from handling a domestic dispute, and then somebody calls and says, yeah, there's 2 garbage cans in the middle of the street. Well, let's send the police over there. So they're being asked to do a number of things. But I want to get into the mental health aspect that you alluded to, Dr. Scott, which is how has the practice, is I believe you put it in your website for the podcast, psychoeducation for law enforcement evolved. It seems like that's one of the good things I keep hearing, is that the help and the support, probably support's the better word, I would think, for law enforcement and their mental health has come a long way in the last 5-10 years. Would you agree with that, or am I completely off base? And if I'm not off base, how?
Well, look, the agency I work for was one of the very first in the country to implement the level and immersion of a constantly rotating training on mental health intervention training. And since that time, over the past like 15 years, many other agencies within the US have followed suit and developed their own training modules, so that police understand, take the best of your internal radar that develops from being a cop, and then put an overlay with some information about what's going on. And I think that it makes the job a lot easier. No, I'm going to say a lot easier for them, but it does add an extra facility to officers out in the field
Mhm.
to discern between what is an escalating situation and then impart to them certain skills. First of all, let me just clear out, like, meth, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but meth is a scourge on our society. I mean, it's really, that drug is so cheap, so readily available, and it is so unbelievably damaging to the neurology of the human brain that it's just like we could talk about that for hours. And that drives a lot of crime. It drives a lot of high escalation incidents in the community. But what we've done as law enforcement continues to evolve is that they are learning such amazing de-escalation techniques,
Mhm.
and they're learning to modulate the tone of their voice, and they're learning to look for certain clues that perhaps this person um, is experiencing internal auditory stimulation, which is the psychobabble way of saying they're hearing voices, or they're seeing things
Mhm.
that aren't there, or they're believing things that aren't there. And as officers get more facile in recognizing these bits and pieces, they can adjust how they're going to interact with that individual, which, just gives them this skill for lowering the potential for danger or use of force, or God forbid, an officer involved shooting, which is
Mhm.
we always want to avoid that. So yeah, I mean, I think it continues to get better and better. And I one of the things that's amazing to me about doing this particular training is when I started doing it 7 years ago, I would go in and it would be a room full of like 35 to 45, usually grizzled old guys, all of them with their arms crossed, their chins back, kind of piled against the back wall. And we would start off with this conversation of like, who here has any kind of intersection with the experience of mental illness? Do you have a family member? Have you ever had a sad day? Not one person would talk about it.
Mhm.
And now we have this generation where it they're amazing. They're like, yeah, my sister has schizophrenia. We've been dealing with it for years. Oh, my dad was bipolar. My grandmother has dementia. And they're all kind of, over the years, this program has become so integral to law enforcement development. They now have a vocabulary and permission to do something that's really vital, which is destigmatize mental illness.
Mhm.
Still have to do your job as a cop, but understanding that there are things that are really out of control of the individual, the subject that you're dealing with out in the community, makes police work a completely different thing now.
Can
Yeah.
I circle
Yeah.
back to your question and just kind of talk
No,
about the
no, we've
evolution
already
of
ran out of time, and
Sorry, that's
you've got
me.
another taco. Yeah.
Ken.
Are you looking for a podcast to answer some financial questions? Well, then check out the Mortgage Beat podcast, brought to you by Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. Mortgage Beat gives insight into the home loan process specifically for police officers, firefighters, and other public safety professionals. The podcast is hosted by Police Mortgage CEO John Aritos, who has decades of experience in the mortgage industry. Check out Mortgage Beat on Spotify today.
No, I want to talk about the evolution of support services for law enforcement and
Yes,
how
and I
that
and I
is.
want and I want to hear it, Doc.
Okay, thank you. You can mute your mic for a few minutes. So the easy answer is it's kind of all over the place. And I think I lose sight of that because the agency I work for was the first agency in the country to ever interject psychological services into the department in 1968. So we've been doing it a really long time. We have a big department. So with that comes a lot of resources, but we've just had so much time to evolve. But when I do get outside of our own department, because I am a strong advocate of that, getting outside of yourself for training, for wellness and understanding what other agencies are doing. Smaller agencies have the luxury of maybe being a little bit more creative and not having as much red tape and being able to try things out and see if they're working. That's when I'm reminded of those good things, but also of a department that's just considering starting a peer support program. Whereas, that is pretty, it should be standard. I should say it's not pretty standard. It should be
Yeah.
standard for sure. But the different options that are out there for law enforcement agencies are pretty plentiful. I mean, if you don't have the luxury of having a mental health professional in-house, you at least probably have someone that you contract with that is culturally competent. Generally, they're only going to roll out when there's a critical incident, unfortunately, but maybe not. Maybe they can provide some self-referred services, or even if it's not that top tier OIS situation, maybe it's something, a little bit below that, but that, some people need some support for, that they can be called upon to do as well. Certainly peer support programs. Not everyone wants to talk to a mental health professional. Sometimes they want to talk to a peer who's been there, done that, and has a little extra training to know how to be a good support, a good listener to them, and then get them to the right resources should they need it. But I love that. I think the culture is going to change. We talk about stigma, and I think it's going to change most dramatically in the next few years just because of the generations, right? So we have the most variety of generations in the workforce right now than we've ever had. And I already see it. I've only been a law enforcement psychologist for 6+ years, and I have seen the difference in 6 years of people that were coming in 15, 20, 25 years into their job, finally wanting to talk about the stuff that is just crushing their soul, that many years of trauma and stress. And now everything's completely falling apart. And then I would say right before the pandemic, I saw a shift where more of the people coming in self-referred were younger cops. They were coming in and their problem, some of them had some really serious problems. Some of them, the problem was just kind of getting a little bigger than they'd like. And so they're looking for support then, not when it's 10, 15 years big. And I thought this is such a generational thing because the stigma for seeking mental health is not there. Mental health support, I should say, is not there. Plus, we live in Los Angeles. Who isn't in therapy in Los Angeles? I mean, so their friend groups, the people they went to college with, they probably had exposure to counselors in college. It's just and I get we're in a special place, not, this isn't necessarily indicative of other places across the country, but it's just a little bit more, tolerated and understood and even like bragged about going to therapy. So I think that's going to be a push with the younger generations. We're going to have that turnover in law enforcement. It's to the point where like I'll be out somewhere in LA or at a different building, and I might see a client of mine, and the younger ones are like, "Hey doc, like I'll see you at my appointment next week," where, someone of an older generation might just be like, "Oh God, I hope she doesn't make eye contact with me." Pretend like she doesn't exist, which we absolutely protect the confidentiality either way. But I had another experience today where I walked into an office, a group of officers were there. One was a former client. That person's like, "Oh my God, I need to get on your schedule." And there's 5 other people in the room. And then the supervisor was like, "Oh, my wife keeps telling me I have to come see you. Just put me on your schedule. Let's just do it right now." And this is all in front of their work group. It was beautiful. It was kind of a cool thing. And then someone else was like, "Oh man, are we just going to do group therapy with you?" Like, no, you guys all get your own. But it's kind of neat when that happens, for sure.
Yeah, that is in having the pleasure to talk to a lot of different people through these different podcasts that I do around the country. While there are a lot of shots that get fired at California, and frankly, not being a native Californian, I will throw some of those shots. Yeah. But one of the things that I have noticed is in comparison to a number of other states, when it comes to this acceptance of officer wellness, that seems to be very, very well accepted, as well as being pushed to the forefront in this state more so than some other states. And I don't mean to put California on a pedestal for that. You know, New York City has a great program.
Yeah.
I know, heard Miami has a great program. A lot of big cities do, but California does seem to embrace that a little bit more than say Arkansas. If you will.
We're crunchy granola, California. I mean,
Well,
we've just been doing it longer.
and to be honest, I mean, I think you're right on point, Kim, when you talk about it being the larger cities that tend to do it, or even the smaller cities in larger urban areas or metropolitan areas. But it just makes financial sense,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it
Yeah.
really in the end is the bottom dollar is if you support and provide, uh not just support, but provide a network and a reflection of the validation of, yeah, this is a tough job, rather than everybody just, bootstrapping it up, which happens in some of the smaller areas. I've presented at crisis intervention training conventions around the country. And, some of these smaller agencies will come up, or, cops or deputies will come up and go, man, we got nothing like that.
Mhm.
We get nothing like that. If I even asked for some kind of support like that, my boss he'd laugh me out of the office, you know, or you'd become the butt of the jokes. And those are not too far removed. That's just like a handful of years ago. So
Yeah.
we may call it crunchy granola out here, but I think a number cruncher would go, that just makes good financial sense.
Yeah, that is one thing that I am seeing, and granted, it's not every department, but even some of the smaller to medium-sized departments are trying to do something.
Yeah.
Are trying to partner with somebody or go to a service that's nationwide or something along those lines to be able to continue moving that forward, because and I think both of you kind of alluded to this, and I'm happy to see this. It's like a good health insurance company, in that, we want to pay for you to get that colonoscopy. We want to pay for you to go get that mammogram, because it's going to cost us a lot less
Yes.
for us to just pay 100% of your preventative care than it is for us to have you not do this and miss something and then have major problems down the line. I think a lot of police departments are starting to think this way. So to kind of begin to close up here, because I know both of you have other work to do here at almost 6:30 here in Los Angeles. Both of you, what and either one of you could start. What, when it comes to law enforcement and your professions, let's end on a positive note. What do you really see working out there today? What's working?
Gosh, there's so much that's working. I know it feels very dismal and negative right now. But I think, and I'm a former cop, right? You said that at the top.
Mhm.
Just like going back to basics is so important. Just like firearms training, right? Going back to the basics is going to be everything. And I think when there's units or there's particular agencies that can really find those moments to connect again with their communities, I think that is working, but then connecting from within the department as well in a positive way, kind of going back to what I was saying, not being in the misery loves company crowd, but going back to the people. I mean, that's what everybody says when they leave this job, right? It's the people that they miss. So and maybe this just sounds like a very flowery psychologist now that I have that hat
You're
on.
not hardened anymore. You're not a cop. You're a
know,
psychologist, so you've softened.
but the human connection, right? So
Yeah.
whether it's connecting back with the people in your community and the community that you serve, to be able to find those worthy moments. I mean, as a psychologist, I can't pull a psychology sticker out of my pocket and give it to a kid and have them light up. I mean, that's only a thing a cop can do. That
Mhm.
that still happens. It's still magical and special and honorable. And if you can find those little experiences to weave into your day, and sometimes it's work, maybe you have to work to find the good stuff, but you also are connecting with your peers. And again, peer support programs do wonderful work, and there's nothing like it. But connecting with the people at work is also very important. I mean, we certainly warn against it being your whole entire world and not having any friends outside of law enforcement, but no one else understands it. No one gets it. No one knows exactly what it's like. It's very, it can be just unspoken. It's almost like telepathy, right? So I think the human connectedness, that thread that connects the two pieces of your career, the people you're working with, your coworkers, and then the people you're serving, finding the positivity in that is what works for people.
Yeah, awesome. Dr. Scott, take us home. What's working?
So the thing that I see working from the law enforcement hierarchy is, man, when you have an LT in your unit who is just enthusiastic, that is an unbelievable sort of halo effect that trickles down to the entire unit. It's inspirational. It's somebody, and it's somebody that is willing to think outside the box, that is critically thinking, that understands, how the system works and understands the challenges, but it's always willing to, like, let's find a way to make this work. So I think that, people who are willing to be leaders, I just see a lot more of them, even in the last few years that I've been working. And then also, I think, to build on what Shiloh was saying, communication, just learning that there are all these other ways to communicate within the structure of law enforcement, and then in community outreach, is enormous. And then the other part is, I think that training is substantially more advanced than I've ever seen it. And I don't have, the sort of the longitudinal history of experience that Dr. Shiloh has. I really only have, I've been in corrections, but I've been working with law enforcement since 2012. And I've just seen every year the level of training gets more and more intuitive and complex and effective for law enforcement than I think it's ever been. And I think that's going to continue because they see the benefits from it. That's what's working for me.
Yeah. Well, as a civilian that staunchly, not blindly, but staunchly supports law enforcement, I'm really pleased to hear both of your answers on that. Well, I could talk to both of you about the podcast, about law enforcement, about the work that you're doing for hours and hours, but it's about an hour show, and we're about an hour into it, so we're going to wrap up. But before I wrap up, for those folks that are watching or listening that really should be listening to LA Not So Confidential, they probably all are already, but for those that aren't listening right now, how best can they find that podcast out there?
Well, we put out an episode every Wednesday. So wherever you get your audio, you can find us. We also once a month do a live stream. We generally have guests on as well. You can find that on our YouTube channel, and we're on all the social media, Instagram, Facebook, X. I think that's the first time I've said that instead of Twitter. And I do make a fool of myself on TikTok. We have a TikTok account. And occasionally I get to rope Scott into it. But yeah, they say that's, where the kids are interacting. So we try to keep that up a little bit. But it, again, a psychology flair to it, sometimes a law enforcement flair to it. We just try to have fun with it. But yeah, please check us out. We have a website as well, which is linked through all of our social media, or if you just Google us, but it has every single guest spot we've ever done. So we'll be happy to add your show to that, Ken, if you want to hear us talk specifically. We've been on a lot of very law enforcement centric podcasts and talk about some of the issues going on there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. All you folks out there, if you're not already listening to LA Not So Confidential, definitely check it out. And most importantly, you guys, always love talking. It's always a good day when I get to talk to a Dr. Shiloh and a Dr. Scott. I know how busy you guys are. Thank you for making some time for us today.
Thanks so much, Ken. This has been great.
It has been great. Thank you to both of you for the great work that you're doing and the great podcast. And thank you to all of you who have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio. And we'll be back with you next week with another great guest.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.